Slater, Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. How are you? Hope you had a great weekend. Coming up at the end of the show, we're going to talk with Professor Vincent Raccaniello from Columbia University, as we do every Monday. He talked to Fauci the other day, so he's got a ton of insight from him that we will share coming up with the latest with COVID. First, I want to start here. I want to play a bunch of clips, just kind of random clips from some black intellectuals in America who are genius. Remember, maybe like 3 weeks ago, I told the story of one of my friends who was able to deprogram someone from the Black Lives Matter cult. And there was like a five-step program, five-step path that he took that we outlined. And I think like step 3 or something was get the person to know who's in this cult, get them to know that there's not a unanimity of opinion for all black people about Black Lives Matter and everything else that's going on today in that realm. Break that mold, this idea that, oh, well, like I support black people, so I need to view, because all black people think the same thing, so I need to agree with them on that. If you just shatter that for them, then it kind of like makes them wake up a little bit. So, all right, we'll start off here. This is Thomas Chatterton Williams. He says, you have one single life on this earth, and you're going to be indoctrinated into an all-consuming quasi-religious belief that the only thing that determines your happiness and prosperity is the random lottery of an arbitrary color grouping you've been assigned at birth. Yes, that's what we're supposed to believe. This is Chloe Valdery. I've never heard her last name pronounced. I hope I'm getting that right. She wrote a beautiful editorial the other day, I think in the New York Times. But anyway, here she is on Brett Weinstein's podcast.
I would say, to piggyback on what has already been said, that for me, this looks like a crisis of meaning in the country. So I think that we are, as citizens, increasingly atomized and isolated, both socially, certainly due to COVID-19, but we've been isolated prior to that. And I also think that there's a spiritual malnourishment in the country that manifests itself in certain ways, one of which is racially. I think that the way in which this idea of anti-racism has been proliferating over the past few months is a direct product of that spiritual malnourishment. And so without addressing that issue, we will continue to have these issues pop up every so often.
Yeah, 2 great points. I love the crisis of meaning, right? And atomized. We're increasingly atomized, like with an A, like an atom, like little tiny atoms. And I like how she said we've been building to this for a long time. So capitalism has done this, part of it. Just this idolization of materialism, choosing things over people and relationships, breakdown of the family. All of these things have made us more atomized. Remember a long, long time ago, we did a segment on architecture and how the center of the home used to be the front porch. So that was the focal point, I should say the focal point of the home was the front porch, and it was facing out into the neighborhood, the front yard and the neighborhood. Right? Then the focal point of the house became the backyard, much more isolated and atomized. Then the focal point became the living room, and everything, all the furniture is facing what? The TV. So now there's not even like face-to-face communication. Now everyone's sitting next to each other looking at a thing. And now it's like worse than that. Now everyone in the family has their own screens, their own iPads, or their own TVs in their own rooms, and everyone's even more atomized. So that's an atomization of the family, even within the home, let alone breakdown of the family. And then you throw COVID on top of that, socially keeping us even more distant. So she's definitely onto something there. But I love this term, spiritual malnourishment. A spiritual malnourishment of the country. Goodness gracious, of course that's true. We have this space that was made to be filled with God, and we've kicked him out, and we got to fill it with something. We try to fill it with something. And one of those things we've tried is this tribalness of race, and it's created its own religion and cult, right? So that's where you got your, we don't have to go all over it again, but you got your original sin, right? You're born racist, there's nothing you can do about it. You got your repentance. Well, it's impossible to repent. This is a works-based religion. There's nothing you can do to be woke enough. But here's all the things you need to try to do anyway. You could be excommunicated from this cult. That's the cancel culture, right? It's all the hallmarks of a classic cult. And we're trying to fill this spiritual malnourishment void in our lives. And Black Lives Matter, people have grabbed onto it. This is Glenn Lowry from Brown University. He was the youngest black tenured econ professor at Harvard back in the 80s. And now he's at Brown University.
the guilty white liberal who needs a narrative about race that allows them to assuage whatever psychological processes they have, give rise to a market for the mutterings of the likes of Ta-Nehisi Coates. And my concern is about the actual well-being of Black people, not about the froth on the top of the waves of American elite culture and how they're reconciling their own psychodramas about racial guilt, but about the actual lives of people who are getting gunned down by thugs a half mile from where they live, trying to pump gas into their car at 1 o'clock in the morning. Somebody decides they want their BMW or they, et cetera, and they put a pistol up beside them and blow their brains out. And the fact that we have a public discourse where the extirpation of Black life in the thousands per year by exactly that means can't even be mentioned. And the handful of Black kids who are gunned down by bad police officers becomes the defining feature of our racial discourse. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a product of this diseased racial, political American culture. I'm less concerned about rebutting him than I am about calling out the depths of intellectual vacuousness and moral superficiality that's reflected in this fact.
I love this diseased culture. Where does it come from? The guilty white liberal and their psychodramas of racial guilt. Similarly, this is John McWhorter. John McWhorter, linguistics professor at Columbia University. He wrote a book review of white fragility. He said, the book, by the way, still #1 bestseller. The book diminishes Black people in the name of dignifying us. White Fragility is, in the end, a book about how to make certain educated white readers feel better about themselves. D'Angelo's outlook rests upon a depiction of Black people as endlessly delicate poster children within this self-gratifying fantasy about how white America needs to think, or better, stop thinking. Her answer to white fragility, in other words, entails an elaborate and pitilessly dehumanizing condescension towards Black people. Look at that, elaborate and pitiless, dehumanizing condescension towards Black people. The sad truth is that anyone falling under the sway of this blinkered, self-satisfying, punitive stunt of a primer has been taught by a well-intentioned but tragically misguided pastor how to be racist in a whole new way. Throughout his long review, I think it was in The Atlantic, he makes that point a couple times, like that she's well-intentioned. He's giving her a lot of grace there that I don't think Robin DiAngelo deserves, but he gives it to her nonetheless. All right, one more. Let's wrap up with Vince Everett Ellison. He was on this show Thursday show. And I asked him about a scene from the Uncle Tom documentary that Larry Elder put out. We've talked to Larry Elder twice now about it. He's amazing, obviously, another person. He's the person who unwoked Dave Rubin, Larry Elder did. So he's got this documentary, you gotta watch it, UncleTom.com. And there's a scene in it where this Black guy's talking to his mom. And he's saying all these facts about crime and whatever. And his mom ultimately, after they go back and forth, his mom says, son, now you're just speaking bad about Black people. As if that's the end, that should be the end of the conversation. There was Wall Street Journal wrote a really great piece about Glenn Lowry, who we just played a second ago, the aforementioned. And they show this scene where his uncle, Glenn Lowry's uncle, who was I would say a father, wasn't a father. He sired 22 children. He was a polygamist, had multiple families, 22 children. Took him aside and said, we could only send one to college. We sent you. I don't see us in anything you do. And Glenn called it a terrible reprimand, meaning you've betrayed your people. I, Glenn Lowry, was making white people feel good about their views of Black people instead of working for the struggle on behalf of Blacks from the father of 22. Okay? So I asked both these things, like this idea of like, oh, you're speaking bad about Black people, you can't be, right? How do you, Vince Everett Ellison, respond to that?
If you love your people, you got to tell them the truth. If not, what good are you? You know, you have to tell the truth. I'm a Christian. I believe that as an heir of Jesus Christ, I cannot be a victim. How can I be a victim if I'm an heir of Jesus Christ? How can I believe in white supremacy if God is my father? How can I believe in systemic racism or that racism has any power over me when Jesus Christ is my father? See, there's the contradiction. They're the ones that have been lied to And also in our Bible, we say that a tree is known by the fruit it bears. They asked Jesus, Jesus said they will come in my name and they will do great and wondrous works that would fool the elect. And the disciples said, Lord, how will we know them? He said, by their fruit. He didn't say about their works. He didn't say about what they say. He said, by their fruits. And what are their fruits? Look at the rioting. Look at the looting. Look at all of this. And he said that you cannot get good fruit from a rotten tree, and you can't get rotten fruit from a good tree. So if the fruit is rotten, the tree has to be rotten. Open your eyes, look around you, and understand this. Black people have always played a large role in their own destruction. I watched the movie Roots as a child, and it's this scene that always bothered me. It was a scene when the slave mother escorted her own daughter to the overseer's cabin to be raped. It was in the movie. The scene where they were beating Kunta Kinte with the whip to try to make him say his name was Toby. Well, the slave master was giving the order, but there was a black man with the whip, whipping Toby with it. See, it's always been us. You remember the movie On the Waterfront when Marlon Brando told his brother, it was you? It was you? I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody instead of a bum, which is what I am now. It was you. It's always been us, man. It's us that tell our children there's white supremacy, there's systemic racism. You can't make it in America. It's us that tell our children that you have no bootstraps to pull yourself up by. It was Martin Luther King Jr. that said, we come to government that 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, the Negro is still not free. That is a lie. I was born free. We are the one. It's been the black community that's planted these poison pills into the minds of their children for the last 200 years. And we are going to be the ones that are going to have to change it. White people have nothing to apologize for. It's us. Stand up and be a man and take responsibility for it and change it.
I want to play the first clip there just to bring it back around to Chloe's point about spiritual malnourishment. Vince has no spiritual malnourishment. And to be fair on his last point about the poison pill, there's a lot of white hustlers, race hustlers out there too. Robin DeAngelo, she makes $150,000 a month. Howard Ross, it was just revealed, billed the federal government $5 million over the last 15 years for diversity seminars about white supremacy, white privilege, white fragility, all that nonsense. $500,000 for a diversity training seminar at NASA. So there's a lot of charlatans peddling racist pseudoscience and racism to make a buck of all races. I'll end with James Lindsay. He had a great line. He said, I'm the one over here saying that any black person or anyone can succeed by their talents and sweat of their hustle. And they're going to say, I'm racist for believing that? Get out of here. Coming up next, progressive math. You know, we've been talking about Marxist math, infusing math class with Marxist ideology. Well, the next level of that is progressive math, which is 2 + 2 =, well, who's to say, really? What are numbers? I'll explain how that all works next. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So we've been really beating this dead horse for a while now, but we're going to keep doing it. Obviously, Marxist progressive ideologies have taken over every subject in school, but we've been focusing on how they've taken over math class because that seems the most unlikely to be taken over. How is it possible to take over math class? So there's 2 different ways they do it. They have the Marxist infusion, and we did that last week with Rediscovering Math, the social justice textbook, and it's all just taking math equations and making them Marxist related. So let's calculate the percentage of presidents who owned slaves. Let's calculate the land mass that the Europeans stole from Mexico, right? Like that type of stuff. So that's Marxism. And then you have another path, which is the postmodern approach, which is what is math? What are numbers really? And you put both of those together and it's total chaos. So why do these Marxists want to take down math class? Well, it's because it's the last pillar standing. This is Bertrand Russell, British mathematician, 1900s. This is what he said about math. He said, mathematics, rightly viewed, possesses not only truth, it's problem number 1, but supreme beauty. The generations of mathematicians have gradually created an ordered cosmos where pure thought can dwell as in its natural home. Uh-oh. So postmodernists hate every word of that, right? They hate truth. No such thing as truth. They hate beauty. Who are you to say? They hate an ordered cosmos. Everything should be chaos. And there's no pure thought, right? So if postmodernists, of course they would hate math. Postmodernists, to them there's no truth, there's no beauty, there's no order, there's no pure thought, only muddied waters of unknowable theories. And you put that all together, there's nothing noble. Who's to say what's noble and good? So they have to tear this down. It's easy to tear down history. It's easy to infect philosophy. But it's much more difficult to tear down math. But challenge accepted. This is, let's start here. So this is James Lindsay. Talked to him. We've talked to him on the TV a few times, and I had him on my radio show. When was this? The 15th. This was been last Wednesday. All right, so we talked about the postmodern, specifically, the postmodern attack on math. And I said, why? It's everything we just said, right? It's ultimately, this whole thing, it's a war on reality. It's a war against reason. It's a war against objectivity. And math gives you an objectively true answer. There's no debate. There's no second answer to that. And the progressives hate that, so it's got to be destroyed. No truth can remain standing. And I asked them how they do this. So we know why they do it, but how do they do it? Here's what he said.
To try to make something look more complicated or less certain or less sure than it is. Yes. And then in that ambiguity, they then insert some political message saying, well, somebody, namely white Western men, have tried to convince you that they know the truth. But look how complicated this is. And it's much more complicated than they say. They've been lying to you all along. And look how they have cheated you through life. You're the oppressed, and they are the oppressors. So maybe you should revolt against them. Maybe they've been lying to you all along, and you need to overthrow them. So that's why they would want to take on math from another perspective.
Maybe not so comically walk me through how they do that. So I'd say you're the postmodernist. So I'd say, hey, James, 2 + 2 = 4, right?
Well, not if you look at it in base 3. In base 3, 2 and 2 equals what we would write down as 1, 1. So 2 + 2 = 11.
And then he goes on and makes this point and muddies the waters more and then ends with, see, it's not quite so simple, is it? You're locked into your way, your one way of thinking, the white racist way, by the way. You haven't opened your mind up yet to other possibilities and other narratives and other ways of thinking. They muddy the waters intentionally. Here's an example of this. I think we played this last week, but just to tie it all together here, this is an ethnic justice student at a university here.
My question to you is, would a Native American or anyone else, would you perhaps even look at this box of candies and say that it can both be even and odd number of total pieces simultaneously?
Well,
how would you go about solving that question, whether the total number of pieces in this box is either even or odd? Would you agree that it's one or the other?
No, I wouldn't, because again, you're operating from different understandings. You can count them, we can count them as we know numbers to exist in a sequence.
Yeah.
We could count those and say there are definitely 35 pieces in there.
Okay, great.
The Aztecs had the Nepohualcin, which is an entirely different understanding of how numbers work. That would go, it's almost like too advanced. I don't even get it.
Yeah, so you think 2 + 2 = 4, but have you ever thought about the Nepohualcin? Have you ever considered have you ever considered how the ancient Aztecs would have added 2 + 2 = 4? Huh? Have you? No, you haven't? Wow. Racist. Literally 1 minute and 4 seconds later in that clip, she starts talking about how the Europeans conquered and took over Mexican territory. Okay, and you're like, why? Why are you? I asked you about Tic Tacs. Can you count the Tic Tacs? And within 2 minutes, she's talking about the Europeans taking over Mexico. What are you talking? But they do that just to muddy the waters, something very concrete, simple, objectively true, 2 + 2 = 4. And then they broaden it out to some super massive, complex, like civilization versus civilization battle and say, see, it's not so simple, is it? Now, you're a smart, well-adjusted adult. You're not going to fall for it. But you get these young kids who don't know any different, any better. And you're trying to teach them 2 + 2 = 4. And the teacher's like, well, you know, you can't nepo one scene, blah, blah. And your kids are going to be like, what? What are the ramifications of this? I've heard people say, you know, things like, you know, this is bad because people, you know, we won't be able to make spaceships anymore and computers and build bridges and all. I'm less concerned about that because the smart kids are still going to go to the good schools that are going to teach math and they'll be fine. And like those smart kids will go on and be rocket scientists still. I'm concerned about the 98% of everyone else who won't have any understanding about math and won't be able to interpret any numbers at all. And I think we're almost already at this point. I think math ignorance is abound, right? Math is a language. I'm conveying meaning to you when we say that, you know, 13% of Americans are black or whatever, right? Like 13%, like that means something. But if you don't have any concept of math or numbers at all, then you can be very easily manipulated. And if someone gives you a point of data, you can say, well, but what do the Aztecs say? Right? But what about Nepowan Scene? And then it's just gone. Everything's gone. Right? So you can't make any true statements about anything if you take out an entire language that we know that we call math. It's very similar to the progressive attack on gender. And I said this years ago when this whole transgender thing started being a thing. Like, why are they attacking gender? If gender, the most biologically obvious thing that could ever possibly exist, right? If gender doesn't exist, if gender is just a social construct, then nothing exists. Certainly not marriage. So it's like the keystone. Gender's the most important part of the whole equation here. You take gender out and everything else falls. You tear the math column down and everything else falls. If 2 + 2 + 4 doesn't exist, then nothing can exist. And that's the mindset, that's the worldview that these people are trying to get kids to live by. So it's not that it's weird, it's the postmodernists, they're not trying to get kids to understand something. They're trying to get kids to understand that nothing can be known at all. Wow. Talking about a poison pill that Vince was talking about in the last segment. What a terrible thing to do to kids. Make sure you ask for your kids' curriculum from all of your kids' teachers. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, we got the professor coming up here in just a minute. We'll get the latest with COVID. But first, do you have a family heirloom in your life? Something either passed down from generations or just anything you own today that has a ton of meaning to you? What is that thing? We'll get to it in a second here. I asked that because I want to talk about the word deconstruct here. You hear a couple words. You have disrupt, deconstruct, dismantle, right? You hear these a lot. We need to disrupt the system. All of these are just different words for destroy. That's what it means. That's the ultimate goal. And they soften it a bit with other D words. But deconstruct is the official term. And I think we just got a bunch of tweets here, and you can just see, it's everywhere. Just go into Twitter or Google deconstruct, and you see it all over the place. So the purpose of deconstruction from a critical theory approach, right? This is the progressive mindset, the academic mindset. The purpose of deconstruct is to undercut everything that makes our society function by attacking their meaning. So ideas, beliefs, words, ideologies, all these things have meaning in our lives. That's why we defend them. If something has no meaning to us, then we won't defend it. All right? In my garage, I have this old mattress that we're trying to get rid of. We don't know what to do with it. You can have it, right? If you come in and you try to steal it, please, I'll give you money to take it, right? It's got no meaning to me. If someone comes into my house and tries to steal my kids, I'll kill you. They have meaning to me. So all the things that have meaning to us in America, freedom, capitalism, liberty, freedom of speech, whatever, all these things. Also more symbolic things though too, right? Like the American flag, Aunt Jemima, right? Beautiful music, whatever. The left said math. The left says if we can deconstruct, destroy these things by attacking their meaning, then over time, no one will even care enough to defend them at all. Jacques Derrida is the guy who came up with this. You've probably seen a picture of him before, actually. He's the father of deconstruction. I'm going to give him way too much grace when I do this because I'm going to say that deconstruction is not necessarily a bad thing, or it doesn't have to be done in a bad way. So his argument was that there are these values that we have in society that may not entirely be good. Okay? So you have reason. Reason is a value. And he's like, well, reason's good, but the opposite of that is passion. And passion also has some good things to it as well, right? Pros and cons to each. So he said we need to weigh them all out properly. So to do that, we need to deconstruct each concept into its simplest parts and analyze them from there. Right? I like it, right? So I have a car. I don't know how it works. But if I really wanted to understand how it works, I would deconstruct it, take it down to each individual part, and then have someone help me put it back together. And then I would really, truly understand how a car actually works, right? So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can provide more clarity, right? So let's do this with George Washington, right? We all have a perspective of George Washington. I mentioned the name, and you have all these thoughts come into your brain about George Washington. And all those thoughts are full of biases and stories that we've heard over the years and all these things. So if we wanted to get more to the truth of George Washington, then we would deconstruct him. We would learn more about each of the individual parts of his life, about who he was, his childhood, the people around him, his family, what it meant when his dad died, this kind of like adopted family that was super rich that he lived with, that he grew up with, right? So we'd deconstruct all the different parts, and then we could build them back up and get a more complete understanding of who George Washington really was and his legacy, right? That's good, that's a good thing. But people have taken that process and have taken it to not create more clarity, but to make things more confusing and more postmodern-y, as we were just talking about with math, right? More like, well, it's impossible to really know anything then, right? So they'll take George Washington and they'll deconstruct him and say, oh, well, look, he owned slaves. And here's all the bad things he did. Here's another bad thing he did. And here's super racist. And now all of our founders are racist. And we still live in a racist country today, right? They just go on these huge, massive, ridiculous conclusions because they've deconstructed them. Not for more clarity, but to assume the worst, destroy, and then use that rubble as some launching point to make massive conclusive claims about America today. So they've done that. In the process of doing that, they've destroyed the meaning of George Washington. And if he doesn't have any meaning to you, then no one cares. No one will defend him, his statue or him or his legacy or this country. Now, they do this not just with George Washington, they do it with capitalism, they do it with America, they do it with Christianity, you name it. And most people just stand by and watch it happen, or even cheer him along. If they can destroy something's meaning, then there's this vacuum created in the confusion, and that's where progressives come in and then push their own agenda. So here's an example. This family heirloom that you own and love. So I have a couple. First, we have my wife's, my wedding vows, got those framed, that's one. Like if your house was gonna burn down, what would you grab? I got this knife that my great-great-grandfather had in the Spanish-American War, which is baller. And then I got my dad's wedding ring right here. Let's do the wedding ring. I think we can all understand this one. This means a lot to me because it was my dad's and I got it when he passed away. Now, if you came to me and you wanted it, you wanted to buy it from me, it's not for sale because it means a lot to me, right? And I could tell you all about it. I could tell you about him giving it to me when he passed away and just growing up and seeing this ring and it's sitting on this like nightstand, and I just thought it was just huge. It's like, how can like a finger, right? Like it just dwarfed my little hands when I was a boy. And I could tell you all about my dad and everything about it. But if you wanted to deconstruct this ring, not to provide more clarity, but to make it more confusing. You can say, Mike, you know that ring, it's just a piece of metal anyway, right? Most certainly it was mined by slaves in Africa. Actually, that's not even gold. It's probably just plastic, really. Oh yeah, it's plastic. It's definitely plastic. And actually, you know what, Slater? It actually wasn't even your dad's wedding ring. You were lied to. And they just seed all this confusion and all this doubt. And you're like, I guess if it wasn't even his and it's not gold or what, then I guess you can just have it then, right? Just like my old mattress. Now do that with every value that we hold dear in America. They deconstruct it, make it meaningless, muddy the waters. No one defends it anymore. And then we have our Marxist revolution. So what's the remedy to this? Know deeply and profoundly what is objectively good, beautiful, and true. If someone came to me and said, Slater, you know this ring, it's not really gold, it's plastic. I'd say, no, it's not, it's gold. I brought it to the jeweler to get it sized to my finger, it's gold. They'd say, well, your dad didn't really give it to you. It was just a lie. He actually sold it and it's someone else's and they gave you this. And I'd be like, no, I took it off his finger on his deathbed. I know it's my dad's ring. It actually has their wedding anniversary engraved on the inside. What's the deconstructionist, what's the progressive Marxist going to say now? Like, nothing. They got nothing. People say, oh, America's a racist country. You come back. No, it's not. No, it's not. Get out of here. Understand deeply what is true. Because truth's the ultimate antidote to the lies. Don't play their game. Don't stand by. We got Professor Vincent Raccaniello next about COVID. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back. It's time for our weekly check-in with the professor of virology at Columbia University. He's a household name, just known as the professor. And all my friends say, what's the professor say? What's the professor say? I was like, well, I don't know. I'll ask him on Monday, and I'll get back to you. Professor Vincent Raccaniello. Professor, how are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you. Good to see you again.
Good to talk to you. Microbe.tv and This Week in Virology is the podcast, everyone. And what's the line you start off with your podcast? You say, this is the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick. That's right. That goes right into it. It's great. All right, Professor. First of all, let's talk about Dr. Fauci. You got a Dr. Fauci interview for like an hour the other day.
Great. Yeah, it was very cool.
It was wonderful. It was great to listen to because it was like you guys were just talking shop. You know what I mean?
Right.
You guys were all on the same page. No lame media people who don't know what they're talking about. So it was really, really good. So everyone go please watch it. What do we need to know about Dr. Fauci? What him as a man and as a scientist?
I've known Dr. Fauci for many years. He's a colleague of mine, right? I know his work. I know he's a leader of this part of NIH that's really important. He's a reliable guy. And if you got one thing out of that interview, it's that he really cares about people's health in this country. He wants to help everyone. He's put a lot of time and resources into, diagnostics and vaccines and antivirals. And I think you should listen to him, not about what other people say about him, because as far as I can tell, he is the real deal.
Yeah, I do not envy the position he's in, right? Trying to balance everything that he's trying to, not to mention his own health. It's wild. So, all right, so please go back. Everyone watch that. On microbe.tv. All right, so I got this article here, a study from Nature. Factors associated with COVID-19 deaths in 17 million patients. What is your big takeaway here now that we got, 17 million data points?
Well, first, the cool thing, this is a study out of the UK we talked about on Friday's TWIV. They have computerized health records of everybody in the country. Yeah, you go to the physician, and there's a computerized record of what went on, and all your information is there. So they can just grab all these records and look at trends. So they said, okay, all the people who are dying of COVID-19, what other things do they have? And I think it's very powerful. Things like, heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, all of those things were associated with not having a good outcome, that is dying of COVID-19. I wish every country could do this. It would be very powerful.
Yeah. As I was skimming it, and this is way over my ability, but I noticed a lot about, something about organ transplant, as that being a pretty high risk factor too.
Yeah, because, if you get an organ transplant, you get immunosuppressed, right? You have drugs that you take to prevent your body from rejecting the organ. And so if you happen to get, infected at that point, it's not good because your immune response can't even take care of it.
That makes sense. So what would you say from this study and just everything else you've heard? What are like maybe the top 3 or 4 things that if you have one of these comorbidities or whatever, you should be extra careful?
Yeah, if you have heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, obesity, those are the big ones. If you have any of those, you should take it easy. I mean, if you can, stay away from people. Unfortunately, many people have to work, obviously. And so if you do, you have to take precautions like staying distant and face masking and so forth. But those people in particular should be really careful.
Why the hypertension? What's the connection there?
It's not clear. It's a great question. What it is about hypertension that is making you more susceptible? It may all come down to inflammation, right? Inflammation is your body's response to stress, not just infections, but, if you exercise really hard, your body does inflammation to try and deal with that. And if you have high blood pressure, it causes inflammation. And that's a big part of this disease. And it may just be that.
What do we need to know about T cells? I think we talked about these like months ago, Professor. So what's a T cell? And I've been reading studies about T cells. What are those and what does this all mean?
So our immune response, there are 2 main kinds of white blood cells. There are B cells and T cells. The B cells make the antibodies. And everybody's been talking about those for a long time. When we do a serology test, we look for antibodies, right? But the T cells, we don't have a lot of quick assays for them. It's harder. So we don't know a lot. But T cells do 2 things, 2 main things. They help B cells make antibodies. So they're important for that. But then there's another kind of T cell that will find a virus-infected cell in your body and kill it.
That's right. That's right.
Kill it. And those are really important for recovering from any kind of infection, those T cells that can kill an infected cell. And so I have a feeling they're going to turn out to be really important for COVID-19. And, we're not looking at them. And the vaccines that are being made, they seem to produce T cells, which is good. And hopefully, they'll end up protecting us. So that's what T cells do, really important, but neglected.
Let me read this from the study because this is Greek. Importantly, we detected SARS-CoV-2 reactive CD4 plus T cells in about 40%, 60% of unexposed individuals, suggesting cross-reactive T cell recognition between circulating common cold coronaviruses and SARS-CoV-2. I love how that made sense to you, and those are just random words. So what does that mean?
No problem. So CD4 T cells are the ones that help B cells make antibodies. So they're really important, right? Because if you can't make antibodies, you're really in trouble. And so in this particular study, they found CD4 T cells that are specific for SARS-CoV-2, but also that are more broadly specific. In other words, they recognize other coronaviruses. And I think we've talked before on this show about the common cold coronaviruses that infect us every year. There are 4 of them. And apparently, T cells against those, CD4 T cells against those common cold viruses also cross-react with SARS-CoV-2. So that's what that means. Yeah.
So it's pretty wild that there's not only... I just learned 10 seconds ago that there was B cells and T cells, and now you're telling me there's different kinds of T cells. So I feel like we can infinitely go down this rabbit. First, just before we go too rabbit hole-y, how many types of T cells are there?
There are a bunch. So that we have the ones that help B cells. We have the ones that kill infected cells, and then the immunologists are out of control. There's a whole bunch that regulate your immune responses. They're called TH, regulatory T cells. So there are quite a few, and they get discovered new ones all the time. It's pretty complicated. Even I have trouble keeping it straight.
Yeah, what a wild world. So the idea is that if you've had these other coronaviruses before, which almost everyone has, then your body's made these T cells which could be helpful for if you get COVID?
It might be, yeah. So we have to still figure that out, but they could be helpful. You're right.
Okay, I know on your podcast you talked about group testing for COVID. What is group testing? What's that mean?
So let's say you have a school, you're going back to school in the fall, and you have hundreds of kids. How can you test them each individually? Now, the day before Dr. Fauci, we had Michael Mina on, and he talked about a $1 test, saliva test. He said if we had that, schools would be a piece of cake. Because can you imagine your kid in the morning gets up and spits onto this piece of paper and says, "Mommy, I'm positive. I get to stay home." But we don't
There'd
have
be a
that
black
yet.
market. It'd be a black market for COVID saliva all over the place to try to get kids to,
That's exactly
to stay
right.
home, right?
You're exactly right. But we don't have those yet. So in the meantime, you take 30 kids and you pool their saliva, right? And then you do a test on that. And then if the pool is positive, then you can go back and get individual samples and see who's positive. And Michael Mina showed that that can work. I was very skeptical last month, but he showed that it can work. Because if you have one person in there that's really producing a lot of virus and that's the person who's transmitting it, then the group testing can work. And it helps save money and time, so you don't have to test every sample individually, because PCR is expensive.
The saliva test.
Any test looking for nucleic acid, right? It's expensive.
How
About
expensive?
$100
How expensive right now? Yeah, so
Right.
we got to get down to $1. So we talked about how to do that, right? That seems difficult.
No, it's doable. They have, in fact, he had some strips, little paper strips that are impregnated with antibodies against the virus. And he said they work. It's just a matter of getting someone to do it. So here's the thing. He's said, we're having trouble getting people behind this. But, we could do it. We could manufacture millions of these strips in no time. And he said we have to get a movement going to convince people to do this. Because I was completely transformed by talking to him, that we could do this and have everybody do a test in the morning every day for $1, and that would be it. We'd control this outbreak in no time, for sure.
Yeah. Well, we had a mass mobilization to make more respirators, which may or may not have been necessary, but it made sense at the time, certainly. So is he suggesting there could be some mass mobilization to do the same here?
Yeah, he said there are a lot of companies that can make these, and it's a matter of getting them on board. And I have to tell you, after we had him on, I got dozens of emails from people who want to write letters to companies, to senators, to representatives, and say, get behind this. This is really important.
Okay.
He's very convincing.
Okay, good. All right. So microbe.tv, what episode was it? What day?
What was that? Before Fauci, 240. That was Thursdays. So Wednesdays.
Okay, so if anyone wants more information on that, you can check that one out. What is the cycle threshold value? I got a study here. To interpret the SARS-CoV-2 test, consider the cycle threshold value. What is that word?
So cycle threshold is a number you get in PCR, right? And when you're doing PCR, you put your virus in the machine, and it goes through cycles of amplifying it. And if you have a lot of virus, it doesn't take many cycles before you can detect it, like 15 or 20. But if you have very little virus, it takes 35 and more cycles. And so the idea now arising is that if you have a cycle threshold of 35 or above, there's no way you're going to transmit. There's so little virus in you, you're not transmitting. So we want to use that as the cutoff so that, when people are in the hospital and they have a cycle threshold of 36, 37, and 38, don't keep them in the hospital, send them home. They're not likely to transmit. It's really important.
That's very good. Yeah, that's amazing that we can get it down to that level of specificity. So it's not only do you have it or not have it, it's how much do you have?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Wow. And we can figure that out like right now. Like, are we able to determine that?
Yeah. And people have done studies saying if you have a cycle threshold of 35 or higher, is there actually infectious virus in there, which you can measure, in the laboratory? And it doesn't look like there is any. It's just pieces of nucleic acid. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, I feel so that's why I love having you on here, Professor. I feel so far ahead of it because that's going to be a thing. That's certainly going to be a thing. They're going to say, oh yeah, he has it, but he has a cycle threshold value of 40. And so it's no big deal.
Here's something really interesting. So I have a clinician on every week, Daniel Griffin, and he says his lab won't tell him the cycle values. He wants to know so he can send his patient, but they won't say. They said, oh, he's positive or negative. That's all they'll tell him.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? So if you're a doctor taking care of patients, demand that your laboratory give you the cycle threshold values.
Oh, very good. Okay, Professor, I just looked over at the clock. I could talk all day. Let me ask you one more. One of your friends, is it Rich, your other guest that you have on all the time? He was talking, he asked Fauci, and he said something about, I forget if Fauci said it or if he said it, But he made a distinction between kids getting sick and kids getting infected. What's the difference? Because I know people are going to use those interchangeably. And what do we need to know about kids and spreading right now? And it's going to update every week, right? But what do we know today about it?
So infection doesn't mean you get sick. Infection just means the virus gets in you and begins to multiply, right? And then you shed it. And you may or may not be sick. So a lot of people think of infection as sick, but that's not right. So kids, we know, get infected. We know they produce virus because it's been measured, but they seem to get sick less often than older people. So we don't know why, but all I have to say is we should all be kids again.
What's that mean?
If we were all young, we wouldn't get sick, and this whole thing wouldn't be an issue. But
I wish we could just a kid at heart attitude. We'd go on the seesaw, and it would get rid of COVID. I wish.
Exactly.
All right, Professor, 30 seconds. Any other last thought that we need to keep in mind?
I think the biggest thing from this past week is we need to do testing, cheap, rapid tests. These are $1 each. They're developed in 10 minutes, and they're not terribly accurate, but it doesn't matter because if you're shedding a lot of virus, all we care about is whether you can transmit or not. We don't care if you have a little bit of virus and are not transmitting. That's really the key. That's going to revolutionize this outbreak if we could only get these $1 rapid tests.
Beautiful. All right, everyone get way, way, way ahead of the game at microbe.tv and listen to the professor's podcast, This Week in Virology. And if nothing else, go back and listen to his interview with Dr. Fauci. It was like 40 minutes, and it was great. Because like I said, it's like colleagues talking on a next level than you get Fauci anywhere else, to the professor's credit. Thanks, Professor. We'll do it again next week.
Thank you very much. Have a good week.
Have a superb day, you too. Just a quick point on how far away we are from that dollar testing, although could be close. I don't want to be negative here. I'm getting given blood at the blood bank tomorrow, and you get an antibody test with that, and there's 7 to 10 days before you get the results. Hopefully it's faster than that, but how amazing if we could do a saliva test and you get results instantly for $1. That's where we need to be. True story, Mike Slater. We'll do it again tomorrow. Spread the word.